Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Views. This is Theo, your host for the episode today. And joining us is Joanne Dewar, a steadfast champion for accelerating disability inclusion in FinTech and more. So today we're going to find out more about what Jo has been up to and what her plans are for 2025. Welcome to the show, Jo.
It's lovely to be here.
Yay. So it's hard for me to imagine that I have been following you, not stalking, but I've been following you on LinkedIn for a while now, thanks to our mutual friend, Rav. And he's been raving about the work you do. And then Jazz doubled down on it recently, like, yep, if you want to talk about, inclusion, fintech, you need to talk to Joe. So here we are. I look forward to meeting you in
I have
person.
been stalking to you as well, I have to say.
Mine is not interesting. Mine is super boring. I think what you're doing is fascinating because I don't think I see something else outside of this little ecosystem that I've been in, and I wish we can see more. So before we go further, can you tell us more about Project Nemo? What it is, what inspired you to start it? Because you were doing something else before Nemo, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, I've been in payments and fintech world for over a decade. I was leading the payments processor that was called GPS, Global Processing Services, and recently rebranded as Thread. And I was sort of right at the epicenter of the fintech revolution. So we were the payments processor that got not only Revolut up and running, but Starling and Monzo and Curve and so many others. And we were right in the thick of things. And so I've built quite a strong network, as you can imagine, across the fintech world. And also, as one of the few female CEOs, I was regularly holding the mic on diversity and inclusion through the Me Too movement. I, said, well, we've got the mic as women, but we need to make sure that we are advocating for other underrepresented groups. I had the opportunity to have a pretty progressive diversity and inclusion approach as a female CEO across all dimensions, aided and abetted by a wonderful head of people called Annette Evans. And we won Best Diversity Inclusion Strategy in 2020 at the Employment Excellence Awards. So that was across all industry in the UK. So we're doing some pretty cool stuff. And we particularly then lent in on disability inclusion. And so then as I exited GPS and I was thinking about my next chapter, I sort of had various speaking slots and I was using the opportunity to say, look, this is what I did. And this is a playbook I've got. And in particular around creating a specific role for somebody with learning disabilities, the benefits that we receive from that was something I would 100% do every time going forwards. So I thought I've got a playbook to share, and I started speaking at events. And the more I did that, the more people would come and back to me to say, "Oh my God, you've got to turn this into something because this is really important to me." Because, and then there's another pause. Actually, my son, my daughter, my sister, my nephew has whatever form of disability, and that's the reality of disability being 22-23% of the population. Every family is impacted in some way, and yet in the workplace environment, it's grossly underrepresented and really not spoken about. And so it was at that point that I started looking more and more at the topic of disability inclusion, and I realised even within the diversity and inclusion agenda, disability inclusion is at best fourth. Everyone is addressing their diversity and inclusion in the same order, starting with gender, then ethnicity, then LGBTQIA. And so it's at best fourth. And therefore it's parked in its on a to-do list. Meanwhile, then I had the revelation that the penny dropped that because we hadn't got people with a whole range of disabilities uh, in our industry or open and advocating in our industry, actually all of our brand new digital products and services had inadvertently missed the fact that they needed to be accessible. Because I think our mindset collectively as an industry was our new digital products and services, of course, they're disability inclusive, because disability is about people in wheelchairs, and this isn't about going to branches and making those kind of in-store payments. Actually, with digital products and e-banking platforms and the rest, we're making things more accessible. Well, yes, but only if you're thinking about those with, sight loss or hearing loss or all the various forms that that disability takes. So it was. I'm giving a bigger answer, but that's how Project Nemo's come about. It was a recognition that our whole industry has really just overlooked accessibility and disability inclusion. And I was seeking to leverage the fact that I've got the network, the profile, I can get the doors open to be able to redress the balance, get the conversation started and do something about it.
I love what you just said so much, first of all. The way you told the story resonates because that's how my journey started, but looking at older adults. So inclusion of fintech by older adults. What are the needs that they need? What are things that we don't typically think about? Because most often fintech's ideas are generated by younger generation who may or may not understand totally what other generations need. So that was where I came in. And so how you're describing, you have the network, you have the status, for lack of a better word. People know you, and you've done a lot of things in payments and fintech. What else are we not thinking about? And it reminds me of something I read in a different book recently, where she was talking about financial inclusion and thinking about fintech innovation outside of the ecosystems that we typically think about, right? The US, the UK, Europe, etc. And she said, most often it's not just the stories that we talk about that's important, it's also the stories that we don't talk about, the voices that we don't hear from. That is also very important. And that's exactly what you're doing. So thank you for that. You were talking about another stat earlier that, the reality of disability, over 20-something% of the population is experiencing disability of some kind. And it resonated with another stat I saw, which is 1 billion people worldwide, right, live with some form of disability. And so embracing it is not just, it's a right thing, it's a good thing, but also makes business sense, because otherwise we're forgetting this whole demographics of people. I don't know how to ask this, but why do you think we had not done much about it? Is it because there were too many other priorities, as you were saying? We think about gender, we think about ethnicity, we think about LGBTQ, and this is like, oh yeah, this is another thing we need to do, and we forgot. And what more should we be doing?
It's hard to know why we've not been talking about it. I think, we've definitely all got people with hidden disabilities that we're working with
that we can't
today.
See. Yeah.
I don't think that we are creating the right environments at the moment for those with disabilities to speak up about their disabilities, let alone to advocate. And again, not just for their own disabilities and accessibility needs, but also those of others. We can relate to this from a gender or an ethnicity perspective. If you're the only person of a particular gender in the workplace, sometimes you just want to be able to be there and be accepted as equal and get on with your job. You don't necessarily want to be the person that's then pointing everything out that's not being done appropriately, that's not letting other people in. And particularly with accessibility and disability inclusion, there's no sort of common thread. There's different types of accessibility need, and it's very personalized. So, if you're in the office as somebody who's got hearing loss, do you want to be the one that's also standing up and advocating for the fact that there isn't, the infographics on the website are not accessible for those that are dependent on screen readers? You don't want to be seen as the person that's constantly raising the challenges, which is where I got comfortable in really thinking, actually, it is the role of an ally to really stand in this space. And I think linked to that, so many people are worried about saying the wrong thing. It feels like a complicated topic to talk about. And so many people are worried about saying the wrong thing. And, is it talking about disabled people, people with disabilities, or do they not want that recognised, or whatever, that it feels safer not to say anything at all. But then nothing progresses. And I found that even now, since speaking to companies, particularly, even larger ones that are progressing their accessibility journey, I said, well, why aren't you showcasing your the fact that you've got customer service representatives that can that can use British Sign Language, for example, or they make sort of other different types of accessibility features and improvements. So we should be celebrating this, because then that encourages others to do similar. And the interesting thing there is that there's a fear of retribution for what they haven't done as yet. So the public affairs guidance internally is, even when we're making these accessibility improvements, don't go and showcase them, because there may be some backlash from some other area. But the reality is, accessibility and disability inclusion is a journey. It's not something that you correct overnight. And as long as you recognise it's a journey, and you can be clear on what you've done today, what you're going to do next, then it's the most rewarding, fulfilling thing to address and be a part of, both internally in your organisation and the accessibility of all of our products and services. And I think finally, linking it to what you were talking about, the older generation, I've spoken often that getting involved in disability inclusion could be the most selfish, selfless thing that you ever get involved with. Because not only, I hate to break it to everyone, but, we're all going to get old, and we're all going to still expect that we can use our current new digital products and services as we age. Because, sure as anything, the momentum is that cash isn't coming back, the branches aren't going to reopen, so we do need a world that we can operate in as our senses deteriorate. But also, even within working age population, 1 in 4 people are likely to acquire a disability before they get to the age of 65. And at the moment that you have, God forbid, an accident, an illness, something that creates vision loss, or, a stroke, or you find, you've got a cancer diagnosis, or, multiple sclerosis, or all these different things that could come out of nowhere, then who's going to advocate for you? You will then be in a position where your journey is about, could start with, tests and, diagnosis and acceptance and treatment paths, and, sharing things with your family. And, there's no one point at which you necessarily even accept that you are, or you've become disabled, let alone then disclosing in the workplace. When in that journey do you start being the person that is then advocating in your workplace for everybody else with every other condition? At that point, your energies are being sucked probably into addressing your own needs, and how you then still maintain a living and a standard of living and everything else. And that just all comes back and reinforces how important it is and how actually selfless it is, because we do need somebody to act potentially for ourselves.
I chuckled when you said that because just last week I was at a restaurant reading the menu, right? So now a lot of these places, they have a QR code and it brings up the menu.
Yep.
The menu was white font on light green background. I couldn't read. I'm like, this is all mushed into one. This is not working. And and I remember we came across so many examples of these in apps, right? That you're looking at the font is so small, you have to expand and these are just normal, regular, everyday challenges that we need to find ways around, let alone there are a lot more complex ones. And again, it goes back to, yes, selfish too, because I will need help, and I do. I have reading glasses. You have magnifying glass. You have the light right on the phone, which I'm very appreciative of. That, but we need to do more because I think thinking of different people from different backgrounds that have different needs that will be using our products and services needs to be part of it and not an afterthought. So what are some of the examples that you've seen that work, or some of the organizations that you've worked with that seems to have it right?
So one of the things that I've uncovered that's absolutely fascinating is that sort of core products like, you know, your Apple iPhone, they're very, very strong on accessibility features. But when we're building our fintech products and services, they need to just have there's a simple switch in there to be able to enable assistive technologies. And in many organizations, that enable assistive technologies is switched off because it's considered a risk and compliance issue. They don't understand what it could enable, therefore the safer thing to do, rather than explore the market and all of those people that may be reliant on that, it's better to keep it switched off. And I mean, I describe a lot of things with my hands. I describe it like this, sort of this butterfly, where we've got all of these features and functionality and of our fintechs, and then you've got all of the assistive controls, whether it's e-readers, whether it's you know, the speech to text that people may be dependent on. People with you know, assistive needs, they will have found tools that work for them, but we need to make sure that those tools can be enabled in our industry, and that penny hasn't dropped across the industry as yet. And there's so many different scenarios. One, there's a lady called Claire Maillet, and I really recommend you sort of follow or connecting with her. She's somebody that she's a fraud specialist, and she also happens to have a stammer, and she talks about the challenges faced. And as somebody with a stammer, the hardest thing to say is something that you can't switch for something else. So if you're struggling to say one word, you switch and say a different word instead. Now, funnily enough, the words that you cannot switch for something else are, can you tell me your name, your date of birth? Well, and then from a fraud perspective, if you can't say, or you stutter over saying your name and date of birth, you are immediately assumed to not be trustworthy in the rest of the
Right,
conversation.
because you're
So it's just like, it's a
hesitating.
real,
Yeah,
yeah, it's a real sort of penny drop. You know, it's the, oh, I never thought of that. Or yeah, and there's, but if we don't have people with you know, a wide range of disabilities advocating around the table, and if we're not engaging with community groups, then we just don't know any of this stuff. We're working at the moment specifically on work stream related to people with learning disabilities. So and MenCap, which is the leading charity in the UK for those with learning disabilities, said the number one issue on their helpline is to do with payments and fraud. So what we've got going on in society with all of the progression with payments and the move away from cash and the move to digital payments, the move away from attended terminals, the move away from branch, the increasing sophistication of fraudsters who are able to double down and target more vulnerable individuals. Actually, it's becoming much harder for those with learning disabilities to lead a safe life in the real world as independently as they're able. And when you think about it, an individual, if they had £5 or $5 in their pocket to go and buy a coffee in the local shops, the worst that could happen to them as they walk down the street is that they lose that $5. In a world where they've got cards, then actually the worst that could happen could be a lot worse, depending on how much is on that card. And at the same time, we're expecting everything's moved to card, to the extent that even going and using the public conveniences in the parks in London, you tap a card to be able to access the public convenience. So we've got a work stream that's specifically looking at what can be done for better provision for that community. And in that regard, this is now, we're well beyond fintech. This is across banks of all sizes, because in the UK we have sort of a conflict in approach between what we have, the Mental Capacity Act, which is trying to ensure that people have as much access and rights as they're able to manage for themselves. Whereas from a banking perspective, we tend to rely on something called a lasting power of attorney, meaning that we have a sort of brute force measure for somebody else to be able to access your account on your behalf. But that gives away a lot of independence and a lot of rights. So what we're doing is exploring what you can do to have third-party access for those who have more limited mental capacity or learning disabilities, but aren't without, they're not without capacity in total. So absolutely fascinating, where, this isn't just a campaign or initiative to wave the flag and say, look at disability inclusion in 2024. We're looking to drive real systemic change in the industry to improve accessibility and inclusion inside and out. And we are, the progress we've made already has just been extraordinary.
I can hear and feel that passion coming through the video screen, even though I'm not sitting in the same room with you. And kudos to everything you've done. I am often curious, knowing what you know now, right? It's been like almost a 1-year journey. I think you unveiled it
in April. Yeah.
In April. Yeah, I remember
IFGS.
that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yep. So it's almost a year now. If you were to know what you know now, right, through this whole year, building up the projects and meeting the people specifically for this cause and changing our industry, what would you have done differently, or none? Curious.
So I think the answer to that is probably it's probably different. It's nothing, because what I've been able to do is leverage all of my experience in the payments industry to date, and all the learnings and mistakes over the past sort of decades of my life, and apply them to this project to be able to have best effect. So when I think about it, we've been incredibly lean and agile. So we've pivoted a couple of times as we've found, product market fit. Because first of all, we were looking at creating workshops to bring people to where they could learn. And then we found that they were incredibly effective, but a lot of the feedback of next step was, well, can you come and now run the same workshop inside our organization? So it was an approach that didn't scale and it didn't repeat. So we moved from workshops to the media of film, and we've got a podcast as well, where that can then be repeated and scale much more effectively. The medium of film we've found particularly impactful, because we're telling human stories. Because so many people at the beginning were saying, yeah, okay, broadly I would be interested in disability inclusion, but how is that relevant for us as a business? And so we've been able to use these microfilms. So each is like, in the UK we talk about the John Lewis advert, which is a very impactful human-led story which brings you to tears within 2 minutes. It's that kind of thing, but specifically about different disabilities, different people, having the relevant voice of the voice of authority, so the RNIB for the blind focused story, etc., and then creating a call to action. That's been really, really impactful. And I decided to make those, really high quality from the outset, so proper cinema grade quality, which is really expensive, but they're now being seen by audiences that care about the quality. So that's been brilliant. I think also I decided not to worry about fundraising. I was in a privileged position that I could self-fund, and instead of seeking sort of tier one sponsorship or grants or whatever and spending a year doing that, I thought, look, let me just run and I'll prove what we're doing by doing. And then the sponsorship and wider partnership and support will catch up with us, because it's always the case that success has many fathers. And if you can prove that you've got the traction, prove that you've got the success, you'd be amazed by how many people want to be a part of that story. And that's definitely the phase that we are reaching now, which is super exciting. So, and then we talk quite a lot about sort of speaking it into existence, in that, if you can have a clear sense of the vision of what you want to achieve, talk about it in a way that it's already happening. And as you say, I can talk with a fair degree of passion, and people want to get on board and be a part of things, and that's how it's all been materializing. So I've been very fortunate with the whole approach. I guess there's two other aspects of the approach that we've had that have been really effective. One was, I knew the way to have the greatest impact would be to get what I call the face of the industry on board. So all of the trade bodies and event organisers, and the key sort of trade media. And so I held, when we say we've launched in the April, I held a round table in the December prior to say, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do. And, will you be a part of this? Will you get on board on from the outset, year one? Because I need the stage time, the platform time, the speaking slots, the stand space, the new award categories, all that kind of thing. And everyone around the table there sort of put their hands up and said, yep, we're in. And that's why for things like at Money 2020, we had this premium location stands. We had a brand film that played on every stage 3 times a day. I mean, it was just extraordinary support. But when we've had that sort of right the way through, whether it's, publications, trade bodies, or anything else, but working independently outside of any trade body has meant we've been able to work across all of them. And the final aspect I was just going to come to was the team that's involved. All a volunteer team, all have responded to shout outs on LinkedIn. So a first shout out January last year to say, right, I'm gonna do this year, and people came out of the woodwork, and a legal company, Fox Williams, said that they would support pro bono. We had a PR company, Missive, that reached out. Yeah, we'd like to be able to support you pro bono, and then various team members as well. And one of the things that's been absolutely fascinating is that it's particularly been really effective for those who are in between jobs, particularly those who have faced and experienced redundancy, where that can lead to a real emotional low. And where am I going next, and what am I doing? And looking for roles and facing rejection. And when you're in between jobs, the thing that you need to do is to get yourself out there and get connected and speaking to people. And then, but you do that, and immediately people are saying, "Oh, where are you? Or what are you up to?" And then it reinforces that cycle of, well, I'm in between, and then you feel bad about yourself. So actually, leaning in and volunteering with Project Nemo gives people something incredibly positive to talk about, and it's really helped people on that journey of regaining their mojo, something really positive to talk about in interviews as well. And we've seen 8 of our volunteers go back into full-time work. So, that was an absolute byproduct of what we're up to, but something else that's been incredibly positive.
I like that. It's a good karma. And you identified an area that needs work as an opportunity for all of us to do something useful and to do good. And your positive energy, Joe, you just bring people together. And so that's amazing. This is a great way to start the year. God knows some of us on this side of the pond need something that gives us hope. So this is wonderful. Before we wrap, can you give us a sneak preview of what you might have in the works for the project this year?
So I had always initially said this is a 1-year initiative. So it's running from IFGS last year to IFGS this year, 29th of April. And it was focused on the UK and focused on FinTech. So I'd set the parameters, and that enabled us to sort of keep quite a tight track of our KPIs and the impact that we're making. But all of those parameters are now being tested with me in terms of, right, are you really just FinTech, or is this more broad? Are you really just the UK, or are we trying to influence more widespread? And I can't see this stopping in a year. So, I do want the industry to take ownership. It's not being done to the industry, it's being done by the industry, for the industry, with the industry. I've got a great opportunity coming up in March with MPE in Berlin. So that really enables us to speak via the acquiring side to the whole merchant ecosystem, which is super exciting. And obviously being in Berlin, like with Money 2020 in Amsterdam, it's definitely pan-European at the very least, if not more broad. We've got the European Accessibility Act coming into force in July this year. So, and I really think that that is going to land with a bit of a jolt in the way that GDPR did a couple of years back, in that people really haven't been focused on it until it comes into force, or just that week before, where people wake up and think, holy smoke, we've got a new legal impediment. And I think for that, particularly in the UK, where we're outside of the EU, we've not really been focused on that. But when you look at UK companies, next to nobody is only focused on the UK market. And so the minute you want to sell your products and services, or have a website that's projecting what you deliver outside of the UK, then you're going to need to comply. So And no one's going to maintain two websites or two sets of services to have one that's compliant and one that's not compliant. So I think it will all have an impact. And this is what our friend Jazz said in his sort of forecast for 2025 as well, that accessibility is going to become all important. And then I think the final thing tied to what's happening with the US and the narrative moving away from DEI, or sort of trying to figure out what do we mean, where are we going to go going forwards. I've always said that the accessibility and disability inclusion is much less about diversity and all about inclusion, because you can't get disability inclusion right without getting the inclusion bit right, which means having an environment where you have a sense of belonging, having an ability to have an open conversation as to what your needs are, how you need to be supported to be able to, perform at your best. And actually, if we can have that human conversation and get that right for people with disabilities, we can get that right for everybody, and absolutely everybody benefits, because that's ultimately what the whole thing should be about, not about, check boxes and statistics of how many of what you've got. Disability inclusion absolutely cannot be about statistics, because what you're asking people to do is put their hand up and potentially therefore be, facing a firing squad for putting their hand up to say, actually, I need support in this way. So people tend not to disclose. And the first thing mustn't be about, right, let's see what we're doing about disability inclusion, find out how many disabled people we've got in our workforce. The emphasis has to start on the inclusion and making sure that you've got the right supportive culture in place. And I think that's the direction of travel. I'm speaking it into existence.
Yeah.
I'm making it happen.
And make an effort and take the action to do so. You said it so beautifully. It gives us a lot of things to think about and gives us hope that at least there are people like you who are looking at this. And, May 2025 and beyond brings us more of things that we can look forward to. Until then, thank you so much for joining us, Joe. And I hope to see you very soon, actually, in London. So, and until
Great.
then, thank you. And thank you to our friends for bringing us together. And until then, thank you for the rest of you for joining us for another episode of One Vision, the FinTech Views. We'll talk to you all next week.